It's not often I get a chance to not only speak with a guy who just came from Davos where he spoke, an eminent MIT Sloan Business School professor and noted international author. And I guess it's fair to say, Erik, you don't have to agree with me on this, that you're kind of regarded as the dean of digital transformation.
Well, I've certainly focused a lot on that in my research. It's been a big area of interest.
You're modest. So let me, if I may, ask you a couple questions to kind of unpack for people who may not be nearly so familiar with the term as you are. Tell us a little bit about how did digital transformation come about in the first instance?
Well, we've, in the era of some amazing technologies, particularly digital technologies, they're the great general purpose technologies of our era. But what we found is that amazing technologies by themselves rarely, if ever, lead to productivity improvements or business value. What you need to do is rethink the business. You need to transform the business to take advantage of these technologies. And if you go through history, the same was true with earlier technologies, electricity or the steam engine. They led to fundamental rethinking of business, and that's what we're doing now.
Got it. So is it fair to say that technology is the enabler or the driver of this transformation that's taking place?
That's exactly right. We use the word catalyst because a little bit of technology can lead to huge changes in business processes and the kinds of skills, the whole value structure of the industry. And some companies figure out how to do that better than others. It's sometimes a bit of trial and error, but if you transform your business to take advantage of these technologies, you can get 5x, 10x improvements in performance.
So most people don't like change. It's threatening to them. How important is the cultural element of getting people to sign on to this change in the process of an organization being able to go digital?
Well, the cultural element is essential and it's hugely underrated. I think the biggest mistake people make is they think if they buy some shiny new technology, hey, they're done, they just plug it in. But the reality is that you need to rethink how the whole company works. You have to switch, for instance, from a culture of command and control, where you make decisions based on very scant information, to one where you have a ton of information and you can do data-driven decision making. You can do A/B tests. You can let the evidence speak.
So you talked a little bit about data, which is very foreign to the legal industry, where evidence is paramount, and yet there's a focus on evidence, but very little data to support it. Could you talk a little bit about how the C-suite, for example, is increasingly using data instead of gut instinct in making decisions?
Yeah, that's been one of the biggest cultural changes. Throughout most of history, decisions were made by getting a bunch of smart people around a table, and nobody really had all the answers, nobody had all the information, and after some level of debate, you ended up going with what we call the HIPPO. That's an acronym for the highest paid person's opinion. And that worked tolerably well for decades or even centuries, but now we have data, and data can help make decisions. So we're seeing a big transformation towards data-driven decision-making. In our research, we looked at 50,000 plants. We found that there are about 3 times as many data-driven decision-makers now as there were 5 years earlier. And a big part of the reason is those data-driven decision-makers are performing demonstrably better. They have about 5% higher productivity, controlling for everything else, than the HIPPOs, the intuition-driven decision-makers.
Now, a lot of people think that data is just a kind of an omnibus term and that all data is created equal. Could you talk a little bit about how one goes about mining relevant data for purposes of embarking on digital transformation?
Yeah, another common misunderstanding is that you just take a bunch of data and you feed it to the machine learning, to the data-driven decision makers, and that's where the real magic happens. The truth is, having worked a lot with data, is that about 80 or 90% of the effort is just in cleaning and organizing the data, getting it together, finding it in the right places. Because of the digital infrastructure we have now, wireless, the Internet of Things, and all the other tools that are available, we probably have several hundredfold more units of data, however you measure it, than we did 10 or 20 years ago. And that flood of data is giving us lots of opportunities, but all data is not created equal. Some of it is going to be much more useful than others, and that's why we have this whole new profession of data scientists to sort through it and organize it.
So from a former trial lawyer's perspective, they're sorting out the materiality of the data, the relevance of the data to the problem that is sought to be solved?
Yeah, that's right. There are a whole bunch of aspects of data. There is the variety of data, many different types of data. There's the volume of data. Of course, big data is all about very large amounts of data. There's the speed of data, that we get it much, much more quickly. These are sometimes called the 3 Vs. And increasingly, people are adding a 4th V, the veracity of the data. How reliable is it?
Mm-hmm. And when you mention speed, I mean, it's pretty clear to a layperson that the business world is moving with far greater speed than it did previously. How does that play into the overall notion of a company engaging in the digital journey or digital transformation?
Well, in many cases, we have access to data in close to real time, and that allows us to make decisions that previously took weeks or months. I'll give you one very simple example. We looked at the data from Google searches. Every time people go to Google and search for something, that is an insight into what they're thinking about, what they're caring about, what they're looking for. If you look, for instance, at Google searches on housing, it will predict what housing sales will be 3, even 6 months into the future. So instead of looking at lagging data from the National Association of Realtors or the government, you could look at a window into the future by aggregating Google searches and seeing which zip codes, which areas are having more searches versus fewer searches. We did this exact thing, and we were able to outpredict the National Association of Realtors. And it's not because we're experts on real estate, it's simply because we had more recent, more up-to-date data than they did. In fact, there are over 100 billion Google searches like that per month, and that allows you to have a huge amount of information about what people care about, not just about real estate, but just about every topic.
So given the tremendous upside of a company that embarks on the digital journey, what is preventing all companies from doing it?
Well, the main barrier is not the technology. The main barrier is the ability to do this digital transformation. As you mentioned earlier, people are hesitant to change, and there are going to be winners and losers. Not everyone's going to benefit. Some people right now, they have unique information, they have power, they have decision rights that are at risk if you make data widely available. So they hang on to that too often. And in the short run, maybe that can work, but in the long run, that's a losing strategy. Ultimately, businesses that embrace a data-driven approach, that embrace machine learning, are going to eat the lunch of companies that don't.
And a lot of people, I think, mistakenly, based on what you've said so far, have the opinion that digital transformation is principally for tech companies, but I hear you to say that it is really for any company that is willing to, invest in the use of technology, but more importantly, applying it to the business model and how they conduct business.
That's right. Digital transformation is not for tech companies. Digital transformation is for every company, whether you're in retailing or manufacturing, whether you're in distribution, marketing, sales, legal. Every function, every industry is being transformed by digital technologies, and that means every company needs to think about how to embrace a digital transformation strategy.
Now, you mentioned that it would include legal within a company. Lawyers, as you know, tend to be very hidebound. They live in a world of precedent. They are very innovation averse, very risk averse. What would you say to lawyers who say, well, this doesn't apply to us. We have a hall pass for this because, after all, we are professionals.
I think the legal profession is one of the areas that's going to be most affected by the digital transformation. And that's because lawyers work with information, they work with knowledge, and you're right, they work with precedent, and all of that information is something that digital technologies can help with, they can amplify, they can multiply, and therefore industries that are based on bits, like the legal profession, will be even more affected than those that are based on atoms, like, say, manufacturing or distribution.
Interesting. So what would your advice be to a general counsel, for example, who might be somewhat hesitant to embark upon the time, the investment, and most fundamentally, the change of doing things the way they've been doing them for decades? What would you counsel them vis-a-vis embarking on digital transformation?
Well, the first thing I would remind them that this is not a choice. I mean, their competitors, There are upstarts, there are people in other companies that are already doing it. So you don't have a choice about sitting back and assuming that your industry is not going to be affected or that your profession is not going to be affected. The question is whether you're going to be part of that transformation or whether you're going to be left behind. So every general counsel needs to understand what the potential is of the technology. But equally important, you also have to be careful about the hype, because there's a lot of exaggerated claims going on out there. And you need to navigate that and not assume that the technology can do everything. One of the craziest ideas is this idea that the machines are going to replace all workers, replace all lawyers. We're not anywhere close to what technologists call artificial general intelligence that can run the full spectrum. But what we do have are technologies that are superhuman in certain narrow specific areas. In the legal profession, for instance, document discovery can now be done much better by machines. But we still need humans to have the judgment of where you want to aim those powerful tools. And defining the problem is something that's going to be in the domain of humans. So you need someone who understands both the strengths and the weaknesses of the technology and can set up a digital transformation strategy that takes advantage of both the strengths and the weaknesses.